Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, back with a couple, not really Valentine's cards, but I'm including them in my Valentine's series anyway. These ones are very heavily inspired by Debbie Hughes, as usual. I will hopefully remember, I will just link her blog and YouTube channel below this video, because these ones weren't specifically inspired by like one specific card, but I'm always inspired by Debbie. Talk about her a lot. I was watching one of her recent videos and I was like, ooh, I like how she does her mixed media style. And then I'm like, I need to do that. It's fun. So anywho, I had Canson watercolor paper and Simon Says Stamps hand-lettered Friends background stamp. And I used my anti-static powder tool on the watercolor paper, and I had the background stamp face up on my desk, inking it up with clear embossing ink, and then flipping the cards or the watercolor paper onto it, pressing it down, coating it with clear embossing powder. Wasn't worried about perfection. Like I always say, perfection's overrated. Funny thing is though, when I don't really care because it just didn't need to be because, I'm going to do mixed media, etc., I get like a perfect stamped impression. So it's true. If you don't sweat it too much and you just go with the flow more often than not, things turn out, or you just work with it, So I coated the stamped lettering with clear embossing powder, melted it with my heat tool, so it kind of looks like nothing right now. But melted it with my heat tool to everything was smooth and melted, no longer grainy, anything like that. Tilting it back and forth in the light to make sure, get it all melted. I do that to both panels because, again, I had the supplies sitting here. The pieces were the same size. I was like, why not make two cards? So then I brought out my craft mat and I grabbed, technically almost at random, 3 inks. I was trying not to do like rainbow or what, just the colors I normally gravitate towards. Picked raspberry, wilted violet, etc. So I picked Salvaged Patina, Bundled Sage, and I did pick Chip Sapphire, which I have been obsessed with lately. I don't know, Chip Sapphire, this last year, I've just become obsessed with it. So anyway, I haven't done ink smushing in forever. So I smushed those inks onto the craft mat, sprayed it heavily with water, and then just started pressing these backgrounds into it. So they're going to mix and create texture and all the pretty colors. And I'm going to dry each layer in between with my heat tool. No real rhyme or reason at this point. I just want color on these backgrounds. So I'm like kind of picking up some of the excess color with a bit of paper towel and then just making sure things are dry, because then that way you can layer more colors. So I wiped up what was sitting on the craft mat. It just depends on what you're doing. A lot of times you can like reuse it over and over again, but I wanted to add like fresh color to get a little bit more intense colors, because like the Bundled Sage and the Salvaged Patina are quite light colors. Chip Sapphire is a fair bit more intense, but once you add a bunch of water to it, it does soften quite a bit. So I did the whole process again, getting just more color. Love. This is not a color combo I would normally, gravitate towards just on my own. That's why I like doing, the color throwdown challenges, etc. But yeah, sometimes when I'm just flying by the seat of my, okay, all the time I'm flying by the seat of my pants. But anyway, forcing myself out of like the typical things I reach for, I tend to reach for the same colors. You guys will still see me reach for the same things. But anyway, these backgrounds are now completely dry. So I pulled out Simon's Tumbling Hearts stencil. This came out last year or the year before. I don't even know how old it is. It's still available. I'll link to it. I pulled that out and I'm using some crackle paste on top of it. So just spreading it just evenly-ish. It doesn't need to be perfect, but just spreading that over the stencil over this background. So as it dries, all these hearts will get this fabulous crackle texture. This as well, like the background and then adding the texture paste. This is what was really inspired by Debbie. I like how she's been like layering up different stamps and dyes and inks and crackle paste and all that stuff. And I highly recommend, one, subscribe to her, watch her videos, read her blog, but also to do things like this. Just like sit down and experiment with, ink colors and smushing and just create backgrounds. Even if you're not going to create cards, create some fun backgrounds. if I'd had the time, I could have done this all day, every day, you know, just mix up the colors, the stamps, etc., etc. It's fun, like really fun. So I applied that paste. I set those backgrounds aside to dry. While they were drying, I pulled out the Peony and Leaves wafer die, and I die cut that multiple times from Simon's heavyweight white cardstock as well as Simon's glossy white cardstock. You can see it there. I'm going to stack layers of this together with just the regular white cardstock. I'm using my craft tacky glue. I'm using the bottle that I put a fine tip metal applicator on. I've shown this in some videos. I only use this when I'm doing like anything a little more fiddly, like a wafer die like this. It just makes things a little bit easier. So applied some adhesive to that. So I stacked the 2 layers of just regular white cardstock together, and then I'm going to top this with the layer that I die cut from the glossy cardstock. So it just gives it this sort of subtle glossy finish. And with something like this, I prefer glossy cardstock rather than trying to coat this with glossy accents, etc. Because there is quite a bit of detail to this, and I don't have the patience for that. It would look gorgeous, though. I honestly thought about that. I was like, ooh, if you put glossy accents and then maybe sprinkled a bit of glitter on it. Anyway. But then I would just die cut it from glitter paper. So, yeah, there's that. So, did that twice. And then, again, everything's still, you know, doing its thing drying. So I grabbed a scrap of the Canson watercolor paper and just the chipped sapphire distress ink. And I'm doing the same thing that I did at the beginning, just, you know, smushing this cardstock into the ink with a bit of water, layering it up. This, again, was inspired by Debbie. I really like how so often I'll see one of her cards and it's always like the little sentiment strip or the die cut sentiment, different things. And I'll be like, man, she got it to match like perfectly. Like, wow, how can you find matching cardstock? And every time she, you know, used a marker or inks or whatever that she was using on the card to create the custom color for her sentiment. And I'm always like, man, I never think of doing that. So that's what I did. I made my own little, you know, color cardstock. By this point, everything is dry. I die cut those panels with one of Simon's basic rectangle wafer dies. And of course I added splatter. I was going to leave it because I was like, I got a lot going on these, but I just couldn't not. I don't even put this away. This is that brilliant gold ink, like gold mica by Zig that I've shown in pretty much every single recent video. So I splattered that on these, set that aside again to dry. This little piece with the chipped sapphire smushing, I die cut with the Miss You wafer dies. This came in the February 2022 card kit. It is available separately, so I'll have a link to it. But I die cut the words from that scrap of watercolor paper, and then the outline I die cut from vellum. So I'm going to adhere those together with the craft tacky glue. And again, did that twice, one for each card. So I've got my sentiment. And then while that splatter was still drying, I'm going to work on my card bases. So I have my card bases and I'm going to mask off. This is the inside of the card, so I'm masking off where the fold line is. And I have that hand-lettered Friends background stamp again, but this time I'm inking it up with Simon's Fog ink, so just nice pale gray ink. So I'm inking it up with that, and then I'm going to flip this card base over and just kind of line it up with the background stamp, cover it with some scrap paper so that I don't get ink all over myself. And my camera mount is attached to my desk, so when I'm doing things like moving things around, sorry, my camera wiggles. It's just, there's nothing I can do about it. Anyway, did that to both card bases, set that aside. Like I said, I was flying by the seat of my pants, so I'm doing everything like very disjointed today. So I pulled out the friend greeting set, and there's a little tiny sentiment strip in there, like a little sentiment that says "Miss you, friend." I just inked up the word "friend" from that with some Morning Mist VersaFine Clair ink and just stamped it onto scrap of white paper or white cardstock, and I'll cut that down and add it to the front of the cards later. And then after setting those aside, because I want to give that ink a minute or two to dry, because VersaFine Clair ink takes a little while to dry. So while that's drying, I'm going to put my card bases inside my Misty, and I'm going to stamp another sentiment from that same friend greeting set, and I'm inking the sentiment up with the chipped sapphire distress oxide ink, because I prefer that for stamping. So ink that up a couple times to stamp that onto the inside of the card. So that finished the insides. And now my splatter's dry, everything's dry, ready to go. So I'm going to adhere my die cut Peony and Leaves piece to this mixed media panel, and then stuck some acrylic blocks on top of it to hold it down so it can adhere. And the little Miss You sentiment, I cut down some little bits of foam tape just for the bottom portion, like the word U and one little part of the S. And then the rest of the sentiment, I'm just going to put a little bit of liquid adhesive just behind the words so that it doesn't show through the vellum. And then that way I can pop this kind of on top of that stacked Peony and Leaves die cut. And then that little tiny friend sentiment, I'd also put a little bit of foam tape behind that as well and just pop that into place. And then of course I had to add some bling. So I've got some Trinity Stamps Mirrored Mint baubles and Midnight Ball baubles. Say that 3 times fast. So sprinkled a few of those onto the card front, and then I'll adhere those into place with more craft tacky glue. And then the back of the panel, I had coated with some Studio Katia foam tape to give it a bit of dimension. So peel off the backing to that, center that onto my card base, and then I'm going to pair these with some soft navy envelopes because that's about the closest color to Chip Sapphire. It's not the same color at all, but close enough. So pair it with those envelopes, and these cards are done. So I was trying to show on camera, like the crackle, like you can kind of see the shine from the embossing and the shine of the glossy cardstock. The crackle is really hard to see, but you can see it in the finished photos. It's just fun, that texture and the crackle, and they got the metallic splatter and the gloss, and just, these were just really fun to make. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. And as always, I will have links below to everything I used. I'll have a supply list directly below the video. I'll have a link to my blog post. I'll have the pictures in my blog post, picture links, all that info. You can check it all out below if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all of it. I very much appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.